National Bureau of Statistics is saying that the likely factors responsible for the increase in the annual inflation rate, that is year-on-year basis, include a disruption in the supply of food products, an increase in import costs due to persistent currency depreciation, and general increase in the cost of production. I'll be going over some of these issues with my guest, Isa Aliyu-Shatta, economist and VP, Conga Pay. Welcome to Inside Aliyu-Shatta. It's been a bit.
Thank you very much. It's good to have you back.
Great. Wonderful. Of course, Isa Aliyu-Shatta is in Lagos. He's joining us via Zoom. I flipped through the NBS data, and according to the report, on a month-on-month basis, the urban inflation rate was 1.79% in August 2022. This shows a 0.03% decline compared to July 2022, which stood at 1.82%. But even within that context, there are still variations. And I'm talking about the differentials in urban-rural inflation rates, depending on the month. So, I know there are countries in Africa worse than where Nigeria, maybe where we are currently, and maybe in other parts of the world. But a runaway inflation, or what they call hyperinflation, will spell doom for us economically. But not to make light of our rather dire situation, does it not seem like we are already at the point where there are distortions in economic decisions, even those concerning savings and investment?
Well, not necessarily, but yes, those are key indicators and key factors that are actually mitigating against all of these dynamics that you've just spoken about. And if you want to drill down, compare the August 2022 inflation year on year compared to last year, 2021, you will see that there was an increase of 3.52%, when you compare year on year. If you drill down, just like you have also said, we have some states, who are actually floating on top. And sadly, those states are actually basically southern states, right? Bayelsa, for instance, is part of those states. Rivers, for instance, is part of the states. And the states who have lower, percentage in terms of, inflation rate are actually also, funny enough, in the northwest. You have states like Zamfara. You have states like Katsina. Then we also have, surprisingly, states like Borno State, where you have large insurgency rate and all that. So in the northwest, where you ordinarily think we should also have that, if it is even marginal increase because of the activities of insecurity, banditry, and the rest. We are just seeing that, happening side by side. One can explain the reason why we see that hyperinflation. This inflation we are seeing is actually inflation that is not actually driven by the fiscal policy or by the monetary policy, but by circumstances that are geared, towards demand and supply. Circumstances that are geared towards supply chains, basically. And there is a ripple effect with what is happening globally, because even inflation rate is going higher.
Across the world, exacerbated by the Ukraine Russia conflict, well, as per food inflation.
Exactly. So, but if you look at it, drill down, you have the high increase in corn, in wheat, in gas. Drill down to Nigeria. This should be an advantage to us, because we are saying we want to push the agricultural sector and drive the agricultural sector to be export driven. But unfortunately, we are not able to actually flatten the curve or even meet the demand. Why? The reason is not far-fetched. I have mentioned insecurity earlier, right? There is a lot of people moving. There's this rural-urban drift because people are no longer comfortable. They are no longer, secured or safe to farm. And when you have little hands involved in farming activities, there are ripple effects. Even those who are already in farming activities, we've heard on the news where farmers have to pay to gain access to their farm. All of these things will have a cushion effect. They will have their own multiplier effect negatively on food items. Now, if you also look at the over-dollarization of our politics, where there is a lot of huge money in circulation, So there are
I
money
remember you and I having this conversation on dollarization of the Nigerian economy.
Exactly. And if you look at the money in circulation, especially during this period of the politics, where there were a lot of cash in circulation, and also that can explain to you why we have a lot of, that percentage increase in urban area in the southern states, and you have lesser in the northern state. But then
it's an amalgam of various issues. I mean, you've rightly pointed that out. It's quite fascinating, the variation and how intrinsic it is. And I mean, when you look at the variations between the urban and rural area, and you mentioned a few states. So I would like to follow up on that line of thought. I don't know, but I'm sure you may have the report there with you. But let's look at the core inflation. I mean, the core inflation axis, state by state, and you would notice that the inflation rate on a year-to-year basis was highest in Ebonyi with 25.33%, Rivers with 23.70%, and Bayelsa with 23.01%. And on the same year-on-year basis, food inflation was highest in Kwara with 30.80%, Ebonyi 28.06%, and yet again Rivers with 27.64%. Does it mean businesses in these states, as well as farmers and processors maybe, are having a lot more difficult time than in other states? We already have identified some of these challenges. You've talked about them. There's also you did not mention access to foreign exchange, for instance, but of course, you did not reference power shortages, that is electricity. There's also the issue of fuel scarcity and transportation. And let's not forget what happens with post-harvest losses arising from lack of adequate storage capacity. All of this. So my question really to you, Ali Shatta, is why do these states that I've mentioned earlier stand apart, and why are they the top notchers in the CPI for August?
Yeah, the reason is not far-fetched. And I've mentioned some of the factors that have contributed to that hike or that increase in those states. If you look at it critically, there has been shortage of movement of food items from the north to the south, right? And with a lot of insecurity that is happening, the tension that is happening around the political environment has also exacerbated the reason why we are having this disparity. And if you look at these states that you have also mentioned,
yes,
you want to ask how many economic activities are they actually into? What is the capacity? What is the capacity of their agricultural output compared to the north, for instance? So that gives you that that gives you the disparity where the demand and supply is not equal. So you have more demand than supply, and that will ordinarily jack up prices because you have shortage of items in circulation and few people can also have access to it. And a lot of people have also adjusted their purchasing power, because right now when people have paid for rent, they pay for those essential services that can make their life just to sustain their life, basically to keep body and soul together. They also want to cut off unnecessary spending on luxury items, right? And that also gives them pressure to want to stock food items. But how many of them even have savings, to go into all of this? Majority of this, critical mass in the Nigerian population live on credit. And before you know it, when it's end of the month, they are either battling to settle their credit, and with high interest rates again. So there's a lot of pressure.
Well,
and
I know a lot of people also pay credits in the United States, in the UK, and other parts of Europe, some parts of Europe. And of course, I know they're also suffering rising inflation. But you interestingly raised a couple of issues in your last response. You talked about rising prices, cutting down on wastages and all of that. So, of course, there's no doubt that with rising inflation, purchasing power is reduced, and the clamor in Nigeria for increased wages by workers across the country. But for that to happen, national revenue inflow must also go up. But seeing what is happening in our oil sector, which largely remains our mainstay, I wonder at the prospect it's also intrinsically linked. Can you attempt to untangle the web and perhaps build one, I mean, that could form a safety net enough to guarantee inflow of funds, cut unnecessary costs, and perhaps jumpstart our economy?
The truth is, one of the first things that we need to do is to cut excess wastages. Because that's one thing. Those are low-hanging fruit. Those are the things that we have control over almost instantaneously. Where you can say, let me give you an example. This might sound a little bit funny. Last year, NURTW in Lagos State generated about 129 billion. This is an informal sector. So if you look at that critical sector, which is the transportation sector, what can we do differently to harness the potential in this sector and ensure that those gains actually automatically count for tax, and the state or even the country at large can use it, in bettering the lives of people? This is just one of those aspects I think we can work on. We are talking about collecting tax in the informal sector. How well have we automated the process? If we have seriously automated the process, we would have gotten more gains in this sector. The next thing that we also need to look at is data. If we have clean data, if you have data with people who are contributing to economic activity, it is easier for you to deduct a source, whatever tax you want to collect, to ensure that you also contribute back to the. But you want to ask yourself one question: all of the tax that have been collected, or multiple taxation that has even happened, what impact have they actually had on the lives of those who are paying them? What economic impact have they had? Do we see clear-cut roadmap to say this is exactly what you want to do with what you are collecting versus what?
Alicia, sorry to jump in here, but I really like your take on this issue of taxation, saying that in other climes there is the clamor for reduction in taxation. Yeah, we have issues of multiple taxation. What really is the balance? How can we balance it at a time like this where we're experiencing rising inflation? Should we be having increases in tax, whether it's VAT or whether it's direct income taxation? How do we balance it out there so that, yes, government does generate increased revenue for taxation, yet the people do not suffer under the strain of multiple taxation?
Yeah, so that's exactly why I spoke about technology earlier, because if you have clean data-driven process, right? We have the joint tax force, right? They can come together, federal, state, local government, and identify different tax channels or different tax items to say we are collecting on behalf of the local government and state. At the end of the collection, we split it based on percentage rate, and this is automatically disbursed. So with this, you can muzzle up a lot of firepower to come up with one single collection source that probably might have an aggregated sources of collection underneath them. But it is clean because you have one data set that you are using to collect tax. So this reduces overtaxation processes and also gives everybody transparency and accountability with good audit trail for everybody to be able to know that, yes, what is being collected is evenly distributed. So that is on the one side. On the other part, we were talking about how we can cushion the effect. If we don't address the issue of insecurity, if we don't really attack it and we are treating it on the surface, we will continue to have all of this impact in our economy. It's going to impact us negatively. So one of the major steps we need to take to ensure that we correct what we are currently going through right now is to ensure that we address the issue of insecurity. It's a no-brainer. Once we are able to fix that aspect, people will now have confidence more to go back to farm. People cannot also do large-scale farming without fear, right? And that will immediately impact the economy because now we can also be export-driven. The war that Ukraine and Russia has created for us, created the markets, but we are not taking advantage of that opportunity. Rather, this further exposes us to what we have been doing, which means we are largely consuming rather than producing.
I mean, I've heard people talk a lot. I mean, I've heard people gone down that lane, and it's quite unfortunate that we are where we are. But you are from the private sector, so I mean, this is an issue that those of you in the private sector monitor. So, in lots of cases, companies like yours, I mean, that act swiftly to respond and reposition can turn inflation disruption into value and emerge as winners. I mean, you've spoken to a lot of these. Why is it that it's difficult for a country like us, particularly, to perhaps go that lane as well, flip the disruptions caused by inflation, and emerge as winners?
I think basically it's willpower, right? The willpower to take first responsibility and secondly to execute. If you combine these two factors together, you will definitely get a positive result into whatever direction you want to take. But first, we need to be able to tell ourselves the truth, to say this is the challenge that we are facing, and these are steps that we have taken to ensure that we correct those challenges. And these are measures we have also put in place to ensure we measure our milestones, we measure the growth, we measure everything that we are doing based on the statistics that we get from NBS as well. So we sort of have a metrics to guide or to gauge the economy temperature to know that we are actually doing the right thing. But like I said, we need to stop talking. We need to start to execute. And until we begin to do that, one step at a time, we will always come back and talk in cycles.
Very true. Very true. You know something. I think Nigeria's major and greatest source of capital revenue is its human resources. That is the brain capacity that we have here. Look, I mean, I know brain drain is happening, okay, but isn't it time for us to play defense? I mean, there are export programs for produce and goods and all of that, but why are we not amplifying the subject of brain capital to earn foreign exchange from right here in Nigeria, rather than having some of our best brains jackpotting? I mean, I know this is possible. I mean, it's possible to work from here and earn FX to augment what is coming from our colleagues, I mean, the diaspora remittances.
Yeah. Okay, so can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Please go ahead. I mean, the issue of capitalizing on our brain capital right from here, to earn FX at least.
So you're talking about the sad syndrome of
Japanism. Ali Shata, we were actually out of time.
Yeah, talking about the sad concept of Japanism, it's really disheartening that this brain drain is happening, because the truth is they are not only taking our brains out, they are taking our best brains out. And if you drill down, they are also taking more of our tech brains out. And this is very worrisome, because we are talking about modernization, we are talking about a tech-driven economy. Now, most of the young, vibrant youth that we have today who are tech-driven
we seem to be having some network issues with you, Alishata. Can you hear me?
Be the one sitting at, to help us, yeah, I can hear you. So they are supposed to be the one sitting back at home to help us, continue the process of, putting all the technology that we have in the country together to ensure that we
can barely, at this point, we can barely see your face. Your shot is so dark. At this point, we cannot we can barely see your face. But if you just adjust your computer a bit and face the light and just round off for us at this point in 60 seconds, if that's possible. Great, I think that's manageable. Please just round off your thoughts in 60 seconds, if that is possible.
Okay, so essentially, what I feel that is more painful for us is that we are not taking cognizance of what is happening. And you are saying, how can we take advantage of the situation? That largely goes back to tell you about the data I'm talking about. If I ask you sitting there, that how many Nigerians have gone out of the country with this, Japa syndrome, you can't even say it, and even the Nigerian government cannot tell you.
There are some figures out there, anyways.
Exactly. So, but if you have that data-driven economy, you can capitalize on it and say, okay, human capital, this is what the tax that you're giving. So, for everybody who is coming or who is, getting our resources outside the country, this is the amount of tax that you pay. for engaging anybody in the country. I think this is essentially what we need to do.
And I hear you, and I hear you loud and clear, and I get what you're saying. But I think it's high time we started to even began, I beg your pardon, to earn foreign exchange right from our living rooms and our homes here in Nigeria. And there are programs where, I mean, there are a couple of work from home programs where we have a few of them. I mean, not so much in Nigeria, where we have some Nigerians earning dollars from here. Offering their expertise right from here, from their homes, whether in Aba or in Lagos or in Abuja or in Jalingo or Jigawa. I mean, and it's happening, but it's not so popular. I am hoping that, I mean, this is time we can take advantage of our massive, very massive brain capital, and we begin to explore opportunities abroad and bring the forex back home here, spend the money back home here, and then, that way we can also increase remittances there. Isa Aliushata, I would like to thank you so much for coming on the program. Of course, I mean, your as always, your thoughts on this issue has been profound. I'd like to thank you so much for coming on Insight.
You're almost welcome. But what I can tell you is that they've given us sort of foreign direct investment. So we are also getting those proceeds coming back home. So they are sending money back home. Trust me.
Thank you so much. Of course, I know that. Thank you so much.